As as you all know, we're here today to be talking about the issues around turning waste into fuels, and then what the issues and consequences of all that might be. I'm just going to take some time to start us off with the karakia to get us started, and I've chosen this one because it's my favourite. We're down in the south of New Zealand today, freezing cold and then beautiful sunny days. So yeah, this karakia is really suitable for that type for this time of year.
Um, I'm just checking in to make sure
Yeah.
that people can hear because there's a message in the chat. Karen saying I can't hear anything. Is it just me? Karen says
Uh,
all good. We saying sounds like we're all good. Okay.
okay,
Karen,
testing,
sorry about
testing.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone all good. Okay, I'm going to kick off then. Me karakia tātou. Whakatakata hou ki te uru, whakatakata hou ki te tonga. Kia mākina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atukura, he tio, he hauhu, he huka, he hauhu, tihe, mauri ora. Yeah, so welcome everyone, and thanks so much for coming out tonight. And a special welcome to Andrew Rollinson, Tricia Farrelly, and Adam Curry, who have been willing to come along and be our guests tonight and share their knowledge and expertise with us all. Uh, we'll have these three speakers. Each one will talk for about 20 minutes each, and then we'll have a question session at the end. So you can put your questions in the chat, and then at the end we'll make some time to so that everyone can answer those. So, as you'll all be aware, our government has really pulled back on policy and investment to prevent and reduce waste, and we really have been very slow off the mark in New Zealand to get good policies and strategies in place to reduce our pile of waste. Some information came out the other day saying that New Zealand, one of the most wasteful, one of the highest waste risings per capita in the world, which is embarrassing to us all. We've got more and more plastic being produced and imported into New Zealand, most of which quickly becomes plastic waste because it was never designed to be recycled safely. And that really is just a honey trap for these people who are really interested in burning plastics or burning, and turning them into fuel. Having this pile of waste sitting around is really attracting a lot of people from all around the world, and that in that way. We're seeing a lot of slick sales pitches which present waste to fuels as a solution. And these are both for synthetic, liquid form as synthetic gas and solid form as process engineered fuels or as rubbish derived fuel. The industry claims include things like being circular economy or that it's bioenergy, even when it's plastic, which is, as you know, different, not biological at all. That it's sustainable, that it's carbon neutral, and we've even seen people claiming zero carbon. Um, but despite all these claims of positive environmental and economic outcomes, these technologies really just look like another linear disposal pathway. They're turning valuable energy and resources into short-lived products and packaging, becomes waste very quickly. That gets turns into fuels using a very complicated and expensive technology, and then it gets burned, releasing greenhouse gas and often toxins along with that. So the question we're here today to talk about is really, are these just dirty fossil fuels with worse climate and health impacts than the virgin fossil fuels that they're replacing? And if you've been keeping an eye on the news, you'll know that these proposals are live in New Zealand. The news reports from the Environment Court hearing about the pyrolysis plant in Whangarei, which has been operating without a consent, come out, raised a lot of questions about, the lack of expert knowledge in New Zealand about what the implications of pyrolysis and other, forms of waste fuel technology really the impacts of those. We've got, our regulatory framework is very weak here and inconsistent. I've got the claims at that hearing that the rules that apply in Northland don't apply. That their rules are a lot more lax than they are in the rest of the country. So we've got a lot of work to do in that space. We've got recently managed to get hold of a report which was done last year, I think, or maybe the beginning of the year before, the end of the year before, from Air New Zealand, which looks into the use of municipal solid waste to turn it into sustainable aviation fuel. There's proposals as well which are coming online to turn Marsden Point into what they call a special economic zone, which we're seeing these kinds of zones coming into being in Australia. And Parks is one of those communities where the normal rules don't apply. You just set aside all of the planning consents and the rules around environmental impacts, etc., and you just allow companies to run their plants using the technologies that they want to bring in, often not paying tax, often, not covering the real costs of what their facilities might normally be expected to pay when they're operating in a country. And we really don't want to see those types of things coming into New Zealand. It's good for us to be thinking about what the implications of that type of policy or practice might be. We know that a lot of these waste to energy facilities really depend on subsidies or other forms of policy benefits in order to be able to be viable. And in New Zealand, we want to make sure that we're really onto the idea of how we can be aware of these situations and understand what we need to look out for in these proposals. And you may have heard also that the big incinerator that was proposed in Fiji, burning 700,000 tons of rubbish from Australia, 200,000 tons of rubbish from Fiji, has been knocked back, but because the environmental impact report was inadequate, considered to be inadequate for really considering the risks and issues associated with the facility. And that's good news for the Fijian people who have really been asking a lot of hard questions about that. So I guess what I notice is that the more I find out about these waste to fuel, process engineered fuel, rubbish derived fuel, sustainable aviation fuel proposals and projects, the more questions I have. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from our three speakers tonight so that I can see through the greenwash and the sales pitches and just get a bit of a better understanding of what the real risks and issues are with these waste to fuel plants. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Andrew Rollinson, who's an expert in pyrolysis, gasification plants, knows a lot about these things and has been working in that field for quite a few years. He's in a place at the moment where his internet is not super great, so he sent a video for us. He's going to be sitting here with us for this session. He'll be there for the Q&A, but the video just gives us that certainty that he's going to be able to speak in a coherent way without getting glitchy and due to the vagaries of the internet. Yeah, so welcome, Andrew, and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Good evening, everybody. And firstly, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here starting this series of presentations on waste to fuels and to be working again for Zero Waste Aotearoa. My name is Dr. Andrew Neil Rollinson, and to give you a little bit about me, I obtained a PhD in chemical reactor engineering, energy from waste, 2011. I worked in academia for a number of years with gasification. And for the last 10 years, I've largely been helping environmental groups across the world as a technical advisor. So in this presentation, I will be describing what waste to fuels is, the technologies, the waste, the feedstocks, the problems that there are, and I will finish with a conclusion. As a preview now, some news articles. The first one, an oil from garbage plant turned into a polluting abomination. That's in South Korea. The other three are tire pyrolysis plants in Pakistan and India. It used to be that these countries imported waste tires and used pyrolysis to make crude fuel oil for burning. And as you can see from the news articles, they are being shut down or banned. This is a different type of technology. This is sachet recycling in Indonesia using a solvent. And this was a plant that was suspended in 2022. And you can perhaps read the quote there in the top right-hand corner. Someone visited the site and saw bright blue effluent coming out of the facility, flowing into an adjacent river. Now, I'm showing you these news articles because I hope in the next number of slides, you will get an understanding as to why these plants close and what these news articles are referring to. Firstly, there are some semantics surrounding waste to fuels. It's often called chemical recycling or plastics to fuels. A number of terms ending in olysis. Now, olysis is the Greek for change. So thermolysis is changed by heat. Pyrolysis is changed by fire. Solvolysis, change using a solvent. And there are other types of olysis, usually starting with the name of the solvent used, so glycolysis or methanolysis. Gasification is a form of pyrolysis, and there are industry jargon terms for aggregation fuels. And I have intentionally finished with thermal cracking to highlight that these are not new technologies. They were experimented with in the 1950s. Plastic had been created then, and engineers and scientists were looking at whether this plastic, rather than sending it as a waste to a landfill site or an incinerator, could use it to convert it into something useful, more useful, such as a vehicle fuel or as a new plastic. And it was called then thermal cracking. Well, the thermolysis and pyrolysis versions were called thermal cracking. And these technologies were rolled out in the large scale by the petrochemicals companies in the 1980s and 90s, and all abandoned for technical reasons. So the point I'm making is what you're seeing here is not a new technology. It's essentially a rebranding of an old technology that's trialed and failed for technical reasons. And it's no coincidence that this has come about at the time when the plastics and chemicals industry is under pressure due to the problems of waste. What it's important to remember is that these technologies that described in the previous slide are not recycling. They represent the first of a long processing line. So that what they produce is not good enough to be made into any quality fuel. It needs extensive upgrading involving lots of fossil fuels, emissions, hydrogen, catalysts, etc. And it's a chemical process, not mechanical. You may have heard of mechanical recycling, where plastic is just melted down into fragments and then remelted reshaped into a new material. This is a deeper type of cycling involving chemicals. What waste to fuels isn't, it isn't recycling in Europe. So burning waste in a waste to fuel process is not legally recycling in Europe. And it's a grey area whether incineration, waste to energy, or energy from waste, which are another terms for incineration, could be considered as waste to fuel because it's essentially used as a fuel to generate electricity. But in this presentation, I won't discuss these any further. What I will define waste to fuels as is only where the fuel production stage is decoupled from the burning stage, which I hope that makes sense. So it's to make something that can be later used as a fuel. A number of feedstocks from waste have been proposed. So municipal solid waste, that includes domestic or commercial wastes, single types of plastic, mixed plastic, end-of-life tires, sewage sludge, process waste, refuse-derived fuel or solid recovered fuel. That is a reconstituted municipal solid waste, so it will have been subject to shredding and the removal of certain materials, like metals or perhaps some chlorine, but it's still highly mixed, highly heterogeneous. And I've placed in red there biomass, biodiesel, and bioethanol. Now, these are established biofuels, often from agricultural crops rather than waste. And for that reason, I have set them outside of the content of this presentation. Pyrolysis then, let's go into details. What is pyrolysis? Many of the techniques are based on pyrolysis. So look at the picture of the match. strike a match, and then a flame is produced. But the flame is not the burning of the match stalk itself. It's the burning of gas coming off the match stalk. And that gas is pyrolysis gas. And the same happens with the burning of logwood on a fire. The flames that one warms oneself with are the burning of pyrolysis gas. So pyrolysis is an early stage in all combustion. So with engineered pyrolysis, the principle is to set things burning, but then stop oxygen getting in, so that over a number of days, in terms of charcoal production, the material will smolder away and produce an oil and a gas. And you can know this from when you snuff out the oxygen in a fire in a stove, your chimney gets a tar substance in it. That tar is condensable pyrolysis oil and gas. So the oil goes on to be upgraded into fuel for when these technologies are used for waste fuels. The gas can be burned as a fuel with the oil directly, and the char is also combustible, but that should not be used for waste because it contains a lot of the toxic elements. Gasification is pyrolysis plus. It's pyrolysis at its core. It is a little bit different because in the 1920s and 30s, when this technology was at its peak, lots of ingenious investigations found a way to make the gas a little bit cleaner so that it could power an engine. It's not a simple process, but that is what the gasification route to waste fuels does. It uses ingenious reactor design, and here the gas rather than the oil is sent off for later processing to be used as a fuel. Solvent-based techniques still use heat, still use pressure, so they could be a form of thermolysis, but they use chemical solvent to dissolve, I'd say in all cases, plastic, ideally single types of plastic. They may use a catalyst, they may use hydrogen, and that produces a substance that can be stripped out of the solvent mixture and essentially, in theory, sent for further processing to be used as a product. Looking at pyrolysis problems now, I'd say that there are three. The first one is it's energy consuming. It's endothermic. It needs a lot of fuel to heat the reactor. Some of that could be supplemented by burning the gas and oil itself, but that obviously reduces the efficiency of the process. But usually it's natural gas that's burned in copious amounts around a pyrolysis reactor. The second, perhaps more fundamental problem, which the quote shows there from 1871, 150 years ago, it's fully established, it's well known that pyrolysis does not break down materials into the building blocks from which they were first created. It gets to a certain point, just short of the optimum for breaking down products, where different reactions take over and they produce unwanted chemicals. In this case, we're talking about polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and dioxins. It's my intention not to talk too much about the hazardous nature of these process outputs. I'm hoping that the second speaker will do that. But what this means is that the oil needs upgrading. Unless it's burnt directly in a combustion chamber, which is a polluting process, the oil needs cleaning up before it can be used as a detached vehicular fuel. And this produces effluent, waste materials. The third and final problem is when mixed waste or plastic is used as a feedstock, it's full of additives, and these come out into the oil and the char, and they need extensive upgrading to strip them out again. Now, the gasification process uses the gas as a fuel, as I've said, rather than the pyrolysis process using oil. It cannot tolerate heterogeneous feedstock. This has been known for 100 years. It's to do with how the material is fed into the reactor and how it packs in the reactor, stopping heat flow and causing the gas to be unclean. There are different types of gasification reactor, but they all have their issues. But in short, the gas would need extensive processing to clean out contaminants before it can be made into, for example, an aviation fuel. Now, this is the route for aviation fuels, gasification followed by usually Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. Now, with sustainable aviation fuels, the bar is raised very high because the fuel, for safety reasons, needs to match very strict standards, understandably. But the fuel also has many other uses on the plane, such as driving hydraulics. And because of the cost of jet engine aircraft, it must be a drop-in type alternative to kerosene. So the gas, as I've mentioned, is 2 off specification from Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. As you can see from the quote there, impurities from waste such as nitrogen, chlorine, sulfur, tar, and soot would deactivate the catalyst. The unsuitable hydrogen and carbon monoxide ratios need gas cleaning stages on top of other additional processing. Solvent-based methods have their own issues. They require lots of solvent. Industry doesn't usually admit this. They say it's for proprietary reasons, but the ratios are about 10 or even 30 to 1, the amount of solvent per amount of waste. And these solvents are hazardous. They can be regenerated, but regeneration needs energy input. Many processing stages to bring the material back onto specification for use, distillation, filtration, pH adjustment, and often a second solvent is used in greater quantities than the first to strip out the target material. So lots of waste created, lots of energy needed. Refer back to the plant in Indonesia on the second or the third slide. So as the quote shows at the bottom, the low yield, long processing times, high temperature and high energy demand, in addition to a poor quality product. So for fundamental reasons, I hope that I've tried to show you that yes, you can make a crude oil or a crude gas from waste. And unless you just burn it directly, close coupled to the reactor, you cannot make it into an alternative to vehicular fuel because of the poor quality of waste. As the title says, you cannot simply turn rubbish into gold. All the additives in it, and also because of the nature of the processes, pyrolysis and solvolysis and gasification, they are not suitable for doing what industry wants them to do. Now, you can tag on lots of processing at the end. It might be achievable, but the economics are going to be unfavorable. The waste production is going to be high. The amount of energy needed is going to be high, and it totally undermines the sustainable claims of the process. Now, this is all because of what's called the second law of thermodynamics. You break something down, you've got to rebuild it again. And the more complex the substance, the more difficult it is to rebuild. It's called entropy. I'm not going to explain about this in more detail, but it's basic engineering fundamentals. So if you want to do something with waste, then the best way, the most sensible option is to minimize its complexity. Remove or disclose plastic additives. Currently, there's no mandatory right for industry to disclose the additives it puts into plastic. Design for recycling. Prove upstream source separation, or make products that are repairable. That concludes the presentation. Thank you very much. There's my email address if anyone wants to communicate with me. And there's my website with a list of publications on that. Thank you once again.
Oh, thanks so much, Andrew. That's great. And really appreciate your diagrams for showing us how many processes exactly you have to go through after that initial one. Really gives you a feeling of how complex these processes actually are. So we're going to go straight on to Tricia, and we'll have take the questions afterwards. So don't forget to put your questions in the chat or save them up so you can keep them for Andrew at the end. Tricia Farrelly is a senior research scientist with a focus on science policy and systems approaches to preventing and reducing plastic pollution. And Tricia has been part of New Zealand Scientists Coalition, working for an effective global plastics treaty over the last few years, which has been a challenging task. Really appreciate her, just being willing to keep on going with this work despite a number of challenges out there in the global environment. And she's here today to speak on the health and environmental impacts of the plastics to fuels technologies. So I'm just going to get the presentation up. Here we go. I'm going to go, where am I?
Sue, let me know if you want me to do that on my end.
Have you got it?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you do it. Sorry.
That's okay.
Just that's what I was looking for, the play from the start button.
Can
Thanks.
everyone see that okay?
Yeah. Thanks, Val. That's great.
Great.
Okay. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Always feel quite nervous following from Andrew. Andrew is extremely knowledgeable about all the technical aspects of this that I really still, after a few years of sort of part-time trying to get my head around, still cannot really get the full gist of it. And certainly looking at some of the consent applications that have come through here in Aotearoa and overseas, it doesn't help me at all. So thank goodness for people like Andrew to help us get through the crunchy technical side of things. And also I feel a bit nervous about presenting on this subject. This is not something that I have researched closely. As a social scientist, but it is something that's very dear to my heart. So just as any good social scientist might do, I've sort of dipped in and out of this over the years and tried to keep up with the burgeoning research on the human health and environmental health impacts associated with plastics to fuel, waste to energy, thermal treatment of waste, and with a particular interest in plastic waste to energy. So without further ado, I would like to maybe go to the next slide to start off with, because I think that this report here is an excellent one. It's close to home. It's written by mostly from our Australian colleagues with some names here I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And I just want to alert you to the quotes that I have here on the slide. Waste incineration and so-called waste to energy incinerators are toxic minefields for nearby communities and produce toxic emissions and waste that threaten the planet. Incinerator fly ash is a highly hazardous waste that contains some of the most toxic chemicals known. And I'd encourage you to have a look at that should you want some bedtime reading. Next slide, please. So you've heard Andrew talk about dioxins. Furans is another buzzword here that I think we all need to know, associated with some of the potential hazards associated with these forms of technology. Dioxins are a group of chemically related compounds that are persistent environmental pollutants. Many of us know of these more familiarly as POPs. They do accumulate in the food chain. They are persistent, and the World Health Organization recommends that the prevention or reduction of human exposure is best done via source-directed measures. That is, strict control of industrial processes to reduce formation of dioxins, and certainly the technologies we're talking about today falls well into that category. Furans are a group of toxic environmental pollutants that are chemically related to dioxins and are created unintentionally as industrial byproducts, and including from waste to energy, incinerators, thermal technology. Next slide, please. So first I want to talk about the different pathways. So we've got the source, which are these technologies. But really, if we go back further, as Andrew alluded to, the source really is around the feedstocks, that feed into these technologies, and then the technologies themselves produce additional toxins. And one of those pathways to exposure to the environment and to human health is via air. So we're going to talk about emissions to air very briefly first, and this is really where dioxins and furans also get a good show. But also heavy metals, including mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, chromium, and beryllium. These toxins can accumulate in local food chains and cause neurological and reproductive harm. Then we can move to acid gases, and these contribute to acid rain and respiratory irritation, nitrogen oxides, products of incomplete combustion. So these are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those, and PCBs. Particulate matter, fine soot and dust particles that carry toxic chemicals deep into the lungs. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and we know those more familiarly as PFAS, those persistent or forever chemicals that are becoming more and more regulated, particularly in Australia, need to be more so in New Zealand. They've really, in Aotearoa, recently sort of hit headlines, and they are well and truly incorporated into these technologies as well. They are increasingly detected in incinerator emissions and also in ash, and I'll show you an article on that soon. And of course, our greenhouse gases, large volumes of carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide as emitted to air from these technologies. Next slide, please. So included in this is sort of nanoparticles. I want to talk about this because that quite often, because they're so invisible, even more so than microparticles or microplastics, these nanoparticles really fall off the radar because of their invisibility. And because they're so small, they are very difficult to research, and including, again, sources, pathways, fates, and impacts, exposures, and so on. So nanoparticles from waste to energy incinerators are these ultrafine particles, less than 1,000 nanometers in diameter. They're emitted into the air from the burning of consumer nano waste, or becomes nano waste, or they're formed during combustion. And their primary hazard lies in their ability to penetrate again deep into the lungs, into the bloodstream, and carry toxic chemicals directly into the body's organs. Creates oxidative stress and disease at the cellular level. They can disrupt critical cell functions, impair mitochondrial activity, and generate reactive oxygen species, or ROSs, that lead to severe inflammation, and they've been linked to increased respiratory and cardiovascular disease. And then, of course, I have to talk about the environmental impact, and we know as New Zealanders that when we harm the environment, we harm us. There is no distinction between the two. And when nanoparticles escape the plant, they settle into soil, they settle into aquatic environments. So we always need to think, when we're looking at consents for these things, that there are different pathways, and it's not just to air, it's often the way that these are consented, but also to water, into soils as well, in aquatic environments. And they pose significant ecotoxicity risks, with poor understanding about how they can accumulate. So it's the accumulative factor that makes this really difficult to assess risk once it's out there in the environment. They accumulate in microorganisms, plants, and in food chains. So this really directs our attention back to the need for a precautionary approach, and to assess from a hazard-based perspective, from the source, which again we talked about feedstocks, whether it's biomass, whether it's mixed waste, whether it's plastics, whatever's being fed into these technologies, rather than relying on the risk assessments, because then it becomes really complicated and really cumulative. So that's just something I wanted to point out there as well. Next slide, please. And so these technologies are often referred to as landfills in the sky. I mean, essentially, we're just transferring the waste in solid form as one form of mass into another. So the amount of municipal solid waste appears to most of us to be greatly reduced when it's incinerated. But no technology can make things just simply disappear. Mass can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only be changed. And the gas, smoke, liquid, solid waste that leave a facility will have the same mass as the solid materials entering the facility. Masses of gas and particulates will go up the stack. Toxic ashes, solid waste will need to go to landfill. Liquid waste will also need to be managed. And then there's the chemical emissions and so on that are as aerosols from the emissions and fumes and so on. So again, emissions to water are quite often forgotten about when consents are submitted. Dioxins can be found in scrubber water effluent, where wet scrubbers are engaged to strip flue gases. If we assumed a plant feeds 40 tonnes of municipal solid waste feedstock, an equal amount of water would be needed, including to clean the feedstock to the point it could be utilised in the plant. So 1 tonne of water, 1 tonne of waste. And operators seldom announce how liquid effluent will also be safely disposed of. Next slide, please. So we need to think not only about these emissions I've just noted, but also what happens in terms of residuals and in terms of the spent scrubbers, filters, and so on, once they've kind of got past their sort of due date. So scrubbers are designed to filter out harmful substances from the exhaust, gases, concentrating pollutants like lead, mercury, cadmium, and POPs, such as dioxins and furans. The sludge from the filters, highly corrosive, it's alkaline. The toxic chemicals and salts in the sludge can easily leach into soil, groundwater, if untreated and exposed to rainwater. And in many jurisdictions, such as the EU and the UK, air pollution control residues are strictly classified as hazardous waste and require specialised management. Because of its toxicity, the scrubber sludge generally can't be dumped into standard landfills, and it will require stabilization or solidification, and this often means mixing it with cement or other binders before it can be securely deposited in hazardous waste sites. So it's also where it goes at the end that we need to think carefully about, particularly when proposers of these technologies are proposing that their scrubbers, for example, can remove 100% endocrine disrupting chemicals, can remove 100% particulates, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Looking at, we're going to be looking at the, sorry, just, so if you could just go to the next slide, we're looking at PFAS now found in fly and bottom ash. And so there's been some really interesting new research studies have now detected persistent long chain and short chain PFAS compounds such as PFOS and PFOA in ash. Wet flue gas treatment systems capture some semi-volatile PFAS from the exhaust and then transfers them into wastewater. And even in modern waste energy plants, some PFAS are not fully degraded and they can escape into the atmosphere or form byproducts or incomplete combustion. Next slide, please. And microplastics are also found now in bottom ash, fly ash, and in soils. Bottom ash is that heavy, coarse residue that settles at the bottom of the incinerator furnace, whereas fly ash is that fine, lightweight particulate that's captured in the exhaust filtration systems. And because fly ash captures toxic pollutants from flue gases, it's highly hazardous. Bottom ash is also hazardous, but generally less toxic and still problematic. Next slide, please. So this is just a few and I won't, sorry, this is the Lausanne, I'm just on a different slide, sorry, the Lausanne case study. Yeah, so this is a really interesting case study where toxic emissions were found related to the waste-to-energy incinerator plant in Lausanne, and this is the area of soil contamination. Toxic emissions such as dioxins, PFAS, and heavy metals were measured in environments surrounding this area, and key biomonitoring and environmental studies have specifically documented dangerous contamination in soil, water, and food near facilities, including in Lausanne, but also in Harlingen, Netherlands, Ceuta, Spain, in Paris, France, and Phuket, Thailand, and in Brooks, Oregon. So those are the ones that have really documented some of the most dangerous contaminants around waste-to-energy incinerators. Now, Lausanne's primary waste-to-energy incinerator is the Tridel SA plant, It was officially opened in 2006. The plant treats roughly 990,000 tonnes of household and commercial waste annually while converting it into district heating and electricity. And the communities in the area have experienced significant dioxin and furan soil contamination. They've done a lot of biomonitoring there involving soil sampling, vegetation analysis, and human serum studies. And these studies have identified elevated pollutant levels, primarily driven by the consumption of local produce and including backyard eggs. So next slide, please. And so speaking of eggs, in 2023, millions of residents across 400 municipalities in the Greater Paris region were warned by health authorities to avoid consuming eggs laid by background chickens. This alert follows studies confirming widespread soil and egg contamination by highly toxic persistent organic pollutants, those POPs, including dioxins and PFAS linked to nearby waste incinerators. Next slide, please. And similarly, in several European countries, cow's milk from farms located in the vicinity of incinerators have been found to contain elevated levels of dioxins, in some cases well above regulatory limits. Next slide, please. I won't go into this in detail, but just to alert you to the quote here around the Harlingen example. Now, these are not old, outdated technologies we're talking about here. I've actually chosen some of the more recent technologies. So we often hear consents from plants stating that this is state-of-the-art modern technology with excellent filtration systems, and therefore the problems that we've seen in the past that are now published are no longer relevant today. I'm just here to tell you that there's the examples I'm drawing from are quite modern, and these incinerator plants are referred to as state-of-the-art. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to fly through just some examples for you to have a look at, again for your own bedtime reading. But just letting you know that there's some really good studies out here, comprehensive reviews of the literature around the human health and environmental impacts. Here's one of them here from Sheriff et al. In 2025, so quite recent. Next slide, please. There's a study here by Hyang et al., some Chinese excellent researchers around this space. Here's one from them. They've stated here that this is the first line actually of the article, China's rapid economic growth and accelerated urbanization have led to a significant increase in municipal solid waste, posing a growing challenge to human health. So go ahead and read that if you're interested in that one. Next slide, please. This is an excellent one as well. This one here is local. The authors include the Public Health Association of Australia, who endorse a precautionary approach to waste incinerators due to health risks. They recommend that new incinerators should not be located near food-producing regions to prevent the ingestion of toxic pollutants, and advise against consuming food grown near these facilities, which I think is quite telling in terms of both human and environmental health. Next slide, please. I just wanted to draw your attention to this wonderful statement here from Richard Kirkman of Veolia, who's one of the CEO of one of the biggest waste to energy incineration technologies. He's been reported as saying, we just need to convince them, that is the public, of the science and of the evidence that there aren't any problematic air emissions or any impacts on their soils. So just watch out for some of those statements from others. Similarly, I'd like to collect some more. Next slide, please. GHGs, greenhouse gases. Very briefly, this is a paper from a good friend of ours, Neil Tangri, whose article in PLOS Climate states that incinerators emit more greenhouse gases per unit of electricity produced when compared with any other power source, which is another interesting read if you're interested in the GHGs associated. Next slide, please. There is a lot also, and I won't go into the details of this just due to time, a lot of growing interest in the healthcare costs of incinerators. So here's an example here, a study by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation estimated that the Baltimore plant alone drives $55 million a year in health damages. Another study attributed $21 million in health and mortality costs to the same incinerator due to airborne toxic metal inhalation. Next slide, please. So these are just some questions that I would just want to finish off posing to all of us for our consideration. Really, I want us to think about at whose cost is it to prove waste to energy technologies are or are not safe and sustainable and remain safe and sustainable. There's a number of us on this call who've probably spent hundreds of hours dedicated to try to fight yet another waste to energy plant that's popped up somewhere else, the latest being TNG in Fiji, all voluntarily done. Andrew has done some incredible, very generous dedication of time to this. I'm sure that most of this is really voluntary and off your own bat, so thank you for that. But really, the cost really is, is it our burden to carry the cost of proving the safety and sustainability of these technologies, or is it those technologies themselves? But then, if it's theirs, we need to think about how that needs to be set up. So, who also bears the externalized costs of those technologies when they're in play? Who gets to clean up contaminated sites when they're closed down? Where are the independent science technology bodies? Now, Andrew mentioned the lack of standards. We need those independent bodies of scientists and experts, including frontline, fence line communities who really know firsthand the impacts of these on their health, particularly respiratory health. And where are the globally harmonised and evidence-based standards that Andrew was referring to, perhaps, but also local standards, national standards, and global regulations? Next slide, please. And here's another question. So even if waste to energy incineration technologies were safe, why on earth would we want to lock in long-term investment in these? Considering they destroy finite resources, they create market for perpetual waste generation, they emit large amounts of GHGs, they produce toxic residuals that require hazard management. And we all are very familiar with the zero waste hierarchy. If it hits right down the bottom of the waste hierarchy, and Andrew's referred to this before too, prevention is necessary. We really need to regulate out toxic chemicals, plastic chemicals, for example, and we need to make those transparent so that all supply chain actors, including those who might set up safer and more sustainable ways of managing these more responsibly, are aware what's in them, and so that we can sort them and clean them into more sustainable and safer systems. Final slide, I think. Thank you. So based on the precautionary principle, there is insufficient evidence to claim that any incinerator is safe. And thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thanks, Tricia. It was amazing to see all of that evidence. It's always a bit overwhelming. You know that there's a lot going on with these chemicals that are coming through and all the products and packaging that's coming into the market. And it's a little bit terrifying, actually, listening to you speak. Not that I want to say I'm terrified of seeing you here, but I think that last slide is really amazing, especially given the comments made by the judge in the case about the Environment Court case in Whangarei this week, where he's like, I don't see what the problem is with these technologies. Must be better than putting it in the landfill. You're like, well, it's just such a great example of how New Zealand, we just don't have the expert knowledge, and somebody who knows absolutely nothing about a subject is passing judgment on what a great solution would be, when you have the government the World Health Organization, the health organizations in Australia saying precautionary principle is the absolute way to go. It's the diametric opposite. So yeah, really appreciate you terrifying me in such an intense way just then. And now we're going to move on to Adam Curry. He's from 350 Aotearoa, which is the New Zealand arm of 350.org. They have a focus on climate change solutions. And from what I've heard, Adam's been campaigning for climate justice since a big storm sent the waves crashing through his community and really brought that problem home. He's here tonight to speak about climate accounting and the energy security issues that we're facing with these plastic to fuel proposals. Yeah, so welcome, Adam.
Cool, Kira, thank you. You can see the presentation, I think?
Yeah.
Great, kapai. So yeah, kia koutou, ko Adam toka ingoa, toka whānau tipunga ko Clan McLaren, no look lomandi kotarana. I'm Adam. I'm calling here from my chilly flat in Aotearoa, Dunedin, on the lands of Kaitahu, Ngati Mamoi, and Waitaha. And I always think that if Manawhina were running our waste and energy systems, I suspect I'd be much better able to afford this flat right now, and we probably wouldn't even need the webinar. Yeah, so I'm going to speak today on the climate end of the issue, which Tricia touched on. But I want to just start by briefly acknowledging the big picture. Obviously, we're living through a massive cost of living crisis alongside an escalating climate crisis. And of course, right in the middle of our collective suffering, the marketing departments of these highly polluting corporations are winning, right? They are rebranding waste to energy as a circular and a climate miracle. And so that's sort of why I want to dispel a bit here. Also just wanted to mihi to many of you I see in the participant list. Many of you are doing this hard mahi on the ground, people like Robert Ireland and so on, fighting these projects. So yeah, always stand with you. So I'm going to outline exactly why these projects are terrible for our atmosphere, no matter how you look at them. Because the absolute bottom line, I think, which is the key point I'm making, is that burning rubbish is more climate polluting than burning coal and natural gas. So it's more polluting than burning fossil fuels. In most cases. And so not only does it completely fail to reduce emissions, it actually increases them while hiding behind creative climate accounting. So how does their corporate magic trick actually work? It basically relies on one word they love to throw around, which is biogenic. And so what is biogenic? So biogenic is organic, right? Biogenic carbon is organic material, things that are grown. So wood, paper, cardboard, food scraps, green waste. And so when waste is processed or burned, companies treat that grown biogenic portion as carbon neutral or renewable. And that's really important because, as you can see here, this is an American number, but it's roughly the same in New Zealand. About half of waste is biogenic waste, right? So if half of the carbon we're writing off, that's a pretty bloody big issue. So it is really significant. And so of course, when if say that half is labeled renewable and it's not renewable, then you're only reporting that fossil-based plastic portion on your balance sheets, and so it takes up half a waste stream. And I'll try not to straw man the argument of the waste incinerators, which is difficult because it doesn't rest on very much. But effectively, they're arguing that this organic trash is free from the emissions trading scheme, free from climate rules, and free from responsibility. And in some places, they want renewable energy subsidies for it. So why? And ultimately, the logic is what we are burning is organic, right? It grows. So we might be releasing carbon now, but it's natural because it was once absorbed, and so it's all circular. And that makes narrative sense, right? It makes a lot of narrative sense, which I think is why, without getting into specifics, it's done quite well, that narrative. But of course, the issue with that logic is that it's not true because there's no evidence that it works that way. So we'll start off with the obvious. So right now, that biogenic, that grown waste is sitting mixed in with all the other trash, right? You've got your garbage bag, it's got a few banana peels, a few bits of broken glass, a few cups. And if you decide to burn that bag as opposed to leaving it at home or taking it to the landfill, obviously another tree is not going to instantly grow, right? Your decision to burn it, or the company's decision to burn it, isn't going to suddenly make another tree grow. And in fact, if we composted that organic section of the waste instead, if you went through and you composted, it would actually store carbon in the soil, it would help plants to grow, and then it would obviously increase its carbon uptake. So the starting off point, that burning the biogenic part, doesn't make sense. But let's say that say it is grown, right? Say for whatever reason, there's a bunch of, obviously this is nuanced, but there's a bunch of reasons why they might say, okay, it might actually grow, and the issue with that is that it wouldn't be anywhere near the same level of offset. So think about this: if I bulldoze an acre of thick, mature native bush, and then I go out with my tree-hugging friends and we replant that same acre with tiny saplings, that new land is going to absorb a heck of a lot less carbon than it did before it was clear cut. Right? And a regrowing forest with tiny saplings is going to absorb vastly less carbon than a healthy uncut one, both immediately and in the long term. And the long term is what matters here. It was, Einstein allegedly said that the power of compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And I think we can think of it the same way with carbon. When you burn organic waste, the carbon is instantaneous. It's burnt, it hits the atmosphere in seconds. And a tree, if it is grown, which obviously we know it's often not, isn't going to reabsorb that carbon for a very, very, very long time. And of course, all that time until a tree's grown, if it's ever grown at all, which we know it's not, would create a massive carbon debt right at the exact moment we're trying to hit our climate targets. Because every minute that carbon is in the atmosphere, it's heating the planet. It's driving climate feedback loops. It's melting permafrost. It's melting the Arctic, which then causes climate cycles to come up, even if it was sequestered later on. And so any policy making that relies on that accounting is flawed, deceptive, and dangerous. And I've sort of seen here in the graph I've put here on the left is sort of what they're basically saying, which is biogenic goes up, trees go down. Trees grow and absorb it, but that's not the way it works, ultimately. And so this is also really important because as well as driving feedback loops, I mean, it's having all the impact. It's causing lives lost. I think we often forget that we've had climate deaths in New Zealand. We had 17 people die in Cyclone Gabrielle. We know every 1,000 tons of carbon causes at least one death that we can prove. In reality, much more. And so all those emissions that are sitting in the atmosphere until a tree is grown and absorbs that, which is probably not going to happen anyway, it is exceptionally dangerous. And look,
Adam,
there's
can I
other...
just stop you for a minute?
Yep.
Can I just stop you for a minute, love? Sorry. Just a couple of people are having trouble seeing your slides because you're in front of them. I'm not sure if there's some setting that you've got where we can just see your slideshow.
Yep. Is this better?
You're still...
No, it's not. Hold on. Sorry about that.
Can you do slideshow?
Is this better?
Oh, yes. Can you turn on your slideshow?
Like this?
Yeah, great. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mike. Perfect.
All good. Perfect. And so, yeah, I mean, as you can see, on this graph here that I was just mentioning, on the left side, the concept is that as the biogenic is burnt, a tree is grown and absorbs it. Whereas we see on the right side, as the biogenic is grown, a tree is not grown and absorbs it fundamentally. And of course, the time's different as well. And so we can see, obviously, studies have looked at the emissions from waste incineration, and you can sort of see here that waste incineration, when you include the biogenic part, is greater than coal, greater than biomass, greater than oil. And so ultimately, the emissions here, because biogenic emissions are emissions that heat the climate in any other way, are still killing the climate. And look, there's a lot of technical arguments the industry uses that misinterpret international findings, and I'm happy to talk about some of the IPCC controversies if that's helpful in the Q&A. But the key point is that biogenic waste for energy is not better for the climate. In fact, it's worse. It's often worse than coal, as you can see in this graph, because that stripy yellow bit is still burnt and it's still in the air, as I just outlined. And of course, this is not solely limited to waste incineration. We also know that landfills also, of course, emit biogenic CO2. And with that landfill methane, if it is captured and burnt, and they claim it's absorbed and carbon neutral, that resulting CO2 is in the same way, well, not in the same way, but in a similar way, also not real. And so the emissions are still there as well. And, as Val, I think, often says, these are not waste to energy plants. They are waste incineration plants that happen, or that also capture a bit of energy. And I think that's the key way to thinking about this, right? This is not about producing large scales of energy for our society. This is about waste incineration and all the harms that come from it, and all the reasons they want to burn waste, and really trying to build social license and obviously get a bit of finance as well as they can from energy in the meantime. And let's remember that ultimately, residual waste, this waste that we're talking about burning, is not combustible. It's not very combustible. Broken hair dryers and toasters and smashed crockery and glass do not burn unless you put an incredible amount of heat into them. And how do we get that incredible amount of heat? Not from burning other crockery and glass, but from burning coal in order to then get the heat so that the crockery and the glass burns. And so, look, this is obviously very oversimplified, but the great point is we're burning an incredible amount of coal to generate the heat to then burn energy for energy, to burn waste for energy. It just doesn't make sense from a climate or from an ecological point of view in any way. And of course, we know there are other ways to produce energy. We don't need to be burning our garbage to generate power. We have an incredible abundance of genuine renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, hydro. We know that with demand-side measures for massive industrial energy uses such as TY, expanding community energy, changing how we manage our hydro storage and so on, we can pretty pretty comfortably with those changes, meet our energy needs without burning waste or coal or gas in the long term. And so it's not needed. So that's basically the key point of it. And so we just remember, my key takeaway is, when we hear these corporate spin doctors talk about replacing coal boilers with waste pellets, do not be fooled. It's a false choice, and we can make different choices. We can intervene to change the way we approach waste at every stage. We can make polluters pay for climate and waste pollution, and a better future, a better waste future powered with renewable energy is absolutely ours from the taking. And those who say otherwise are, in my view, lining their pockets by poisoning our lungs. Yeah, thank you.
That was awesome, Adam. I did love your technology where you could appear as well as your slides. I'm keen to find out how that works, but that's not one of the questions that we're going to ask right now. I'll maybe get in touch with you later on because it looked very modern and stylish. Yeah, so we've got a question section now. We have some questions starting to show up in the chat, and I'd encourage anybody who's keen to ask a question to start putting your questions in there. The first one we've got here is from Hannah, and it is a very long question. I'm wondering whether you've had a chance to read it yet, Andrew, or whether I should read it out for you. It's basically the gist of it is, why do we see so many of these engineers coming out justifying these waste to energy plants and using their apparent credentials to sell them through the applications process, when it really, a lot of the logic of the laws of thermodynamics, etc., would seem to indicate that they're giving us a bit of a false impression about the value of these things?
Yes, hello, Hannah. I did read the question. Well, I think I like Teresia's penultimate slide, I think, about the social science aspect, because there certainly is a need for a social scientific perspective on why to answer this question. Why do engineers pursue a technology that has so many flaws and paint it as being something that it isn't? There's certainly a need for a publication on that. I provided a link to a paper I wrote in 2018 called Patented Blunderings, which may explain some of the reasons for that. It's an age-old problem. It's an age-old issue as why clever people pursue folly. In a modern context, you could say it's follow the money, where people get kudos from having their technology supported by big multinational corporations. There is part of that. But it's not just that. Patents, engineers may have a patent for a system and they want to prove it. And they'll get money from government. There's lots of subsidies available for something that's called a green technology. And so, as I mentioned, follow the money. But yes, it's certainly a perplexing question. And I've sat around the table with many engineers, credible people, who are promoting a concept. Either they don't know that it's no good, or they falsely.
I think we've momentarily lost Andrew.
Sorry, my internet connection. I think I've answered the question anyway, as best I can.
Mm. Yeah, I think that is one of the challenges that we've seen a lot in the hearings that we've been to, and a lot of the cases that have come up. There's been people who have been willing to say, oh, yes, there's this plant in another country where it's really working well. And then when you dig into the detail, you find that even the example that they're using from another country as their base case is actually not working or doesn't exist. So it always pays to really dig deep into the applications and actually check their evidence base as well. So we've got another question here, which is really about, it relates a lot to what Adam was saying about the biogenic emissions and how our global accounting system doesn't count them. I guess the real problem that we have with it is that it assumes that the net carbon sequestered is the same as the net carbon that we're using, net biogenic carbon that we're burning off, and that those two things are equal. But that doesn't appear when you look around the world. It doesn't look like we're growing as much carbon as we are destroying. One of the questions here is we're sending a lot of treated timber to Golden Bay Cement Works, and the question really is burning that timber. It's seen to be a great way to reduce the emissions of the cement plant, and because it's wood waste, it's not the emissions aren't counted. What's the real situation, and is anyone able to answer what the real situation with that is? Whether we're better off to put that timber into landfill, or whether we're obviously better to reuse it or keep it in circulation as long as we can, but. Yeah, any thoughts from any of the three of you about that? So what we know about our cement plant is that they started off burning coal. Then they did a $25 million retrofit so that they would be able to process tires, and they're processing wood waste as well. And now they started to process what they're calling plastic engineered fuel. The justification is that these plastics are unrecyclable, and so there's nothing else we can do. And oh well, we just have to burn them, and that's the best we can hope for. I feel as though the plastic engineered fuel arguments are really becoming quite front of mind here in New Zealand. Is there anything that you can say to us about that, Andrew or Adam, about that sort of that idea that burning plastic is a really great idea if you've processed it into a rubbish drive fuel or a.
Well, I think Val will remember there was a court case in New Zealand a year and a half ago where we had this issue, just how do you clean something from a waste into a SRF and an RDF?
Mm.
And the expert couldn't answer really.
Yeah.
I think it's a way of smoke and mirrors to conceal hazardous substances. Call it SRF, RDF, and people think it's. But when you pull back away at the surface and you see that the technologies can't really do what they can't clean up this substance, and the regulations surrounding how good it is, it's very weak and lax, and it favours industry. What was the other question? Sorry, I mean, I followed what you said about cement. Yeah, it's common in Europe. They burn plastic waste, and of all the technologies, really, it's the better of them all because it's higher temperature, so it will go some way more to destroying PFAS and other POPs. I'm not for that process, but I'm just it's common not just in New Zealand but in elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, so we've talked about that one. Just looking at the questions here. One from Polly Griffiths. Question about communication and battling the big marketing budgets. What's the best ways to talk to people outside of our bubble about this? It's complex. So how do we best have the conversations around the dinner table to shift people's core understanding? Polly's based in the UK. The Chartered Institute of Waste Management's in a position is that environmental waste is a necessary component of the circular economy. And with the waste industry becoming so wedded to these technologies, how do those of us in the industry best advocate for a change in that position or argue against that? Yeah, so I appreciate any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I could try to weigh in a little bit, I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Andrew's right, in that in one of his earlier comments that kind of alluded to the fact that, if we're funded by a particular source and we're being rewarded for taking a particular position, we end up being quite very singular viewed, particularly when we're an engineer or we have deep expertise in a particular place. We tend to not put the blinders on because we're constantly rewarded for going along that same route and doing better and better there, rather than putting your head above the parapet, looking around and taking a systems approach and figuring out actually what it is that you're doing and the impact it's having in a much more holistic manner, and on people and on environment and on human health and on economics, well beyond your narrow view. So I think there's really something in that. And so I think maybe in response to Polly's question, that also sort of segues from that, because we should be constantly encouraging those who have quite a narrow view to do exactly that, to think in a more systems approach, and to push the dial in a different direction. It may be quite radical to those we're sitting around the table with, particularly if they're so focused on downstream solutions, on doing recycling better, on sorting and collecting better, on establishing innovative, shiny techno fixes and technologies that are heading in the wrong direction. Trying to pull them to another direction is quite difficult, but I think it's our obligation to do so, even when we benefit so much from the status quo, i.e. those around the table are benefiting so much from the status quo. And it's a nice opportunity for us to invite those people to think in quite a radical way, but also having ready in our fingertips either evidence or sources of knowledge and information that those people can go to when you're making a statement, and for supply side production reduction, for prevention, for minimization, for different systems entirely, for reuse systems, for detoxification, for circularity, all the things that we all know around this table. And this is the problem, right? We always speak to our people. We need to continue to speak to our people, but support them in ways that they can then speak to people who don't have buy-in, who do think like this, who haven't had the opportunity to have those probably quite radical conversations based on what they're used to. I don't know if that's helpful, but I do think that Sue, you mentioned before, I think about, or maybe Val, we're talking about looking very carefully at who produces the knowledge. And I'm all about conflict of interest. And these proposers, these operators have conflict of interest all over. They all have vested interests in the status quo. So we need to expose that and look very carefully at who's speaking, who's funding, where are they getting the funding from, and what's in it for them, what's the agenda. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that, I think.
Can I step in with a little bit in addition to that? I mean, I fully agree with Teresa there that one thing I've learned over the years, it does get me down. You know, when you talk to people and you tell them what the situation is, and they just don't want to see, and some people just don't want to see, and to a degree, there's only so much you can do. It wears you out. But I will say a couple of things about what you've said, Polly. I mentioned in one of my slides, waste to energy is not recycling legally. So the argument of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management falls down there in Europe anyway. So it's not recycling. It's not assisting a circular economy. I've just written a publication on bottom ash, where the Environment Agency thought it was recycling. It's not recycling in Europe. Bottom ash is not considered recyclate. Only the metals extraction from bottom ash is recyclate. The use of the inert component is not recycling. But I don't want to talk too much on this. It's social. The UK is very. I don't know if it's the same in New Zealand, but it's all about economic growth. It's like a sacred cow that you cannot touch, and that overrides everything now. I mention this because Paul is in the UK. The Environment Agency have now got a motto: growth, monitoring, and pollution. You know, how absurd that is. But that's the state of things, I'm afraid. Just an observation.
And I'll just add one other thing, which I think is, as well as convincing people in the industry and having and rebutting their narratives in the way that we're doing, we need to replace it with our story, right? And I think when the fact that so many people want to recycle and do the things that we know aren't effective it's hopeful in a way, right? Because they're open to persuasion, they're open to messaging. And I think like those true sandwiches, if we say what is true, then we can say that all the stuff about the climate impacts they say that, is carbon isn't true. And then we replace it with our narrative again. If we talk about all the little things, like when I'm trying to sell a cake, we always say, I don't say I've got the best flour and the most amazing cocoa. I say we can have this beautiful, rich cake that's creamy and so on, And I think it's the same with waste, right? We can talk about the future that we want to see with waste, and then these policies fit into it, And I think until people believe in this future and really can see the cake, I think we're not going to be convincing people to come to the future that we come to as well.
I'll just add too that, as we were talking about before, this is complex technology. And we can be really blinded by the complexity. And maybe Andrew's got something to say about this. So when we're confronted with these consents, it's very overwhelming. And it's very hard to cut through the science when we're, particularly for those who are not scientists, particularly those like myself who don't have an expertise in the technology. It's very overwhelming, and it's very easy for us to just go, well, I have no idea. Maybe it's okay. I mean, it sounds really technical, so they must know. What would you say to that, Andrew? I mean, it might be difficult for you to answer because you do understand the science, but what about for those of us that you work with? How do you help us with the complexities that we're confronted with in these consents, for example?
I think you're absolutely right, Teresa, and I've been trying to succeed with this for 50, because it is even for an engineer. Gasification is very, very difficult to understand, and maybe I haven't succeeded, but that really has been what I've been trying to do for many years now. And I was at a court case in the UK last week where I tried for 2 weeks to explain the technology, and the barrister just didn't pick up anything I'd said. So I feel like I've wasted my time. But all I can say is that I just try my best to make it simple to understand, and probably gauge for yourself whether I did that today with this presentation. But yeah, they do. The technology providers and those proposing the systems, they baffle people, and that's where I joined this movement, because people were being baffled by what gasification is, and I thought, well, I understand this, and I'll try and help you, and that's my route in, and it's still the same 15 years later. So I don't know, I don't have the answers, Teresa.
I sometimes feel it's a tactic, because some of the information we've seen as we've gone through it with you and with others as well is there's tactics in there. Omission of information, withholding of information, for example, glossing over some things, not providing the detail that would be needed in order to really determine, how things are. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think like what I would say is, I have quite a lot of success with different things. Like, one of the things which was brought up at the by Mason Dury at the fielding hearings was the idea that we just can't afford to invest in technologies that cause harm. And saying something simple like that, then people are like, oh, what do you mean it causes harm? Like, then you have the inroad to start explaining it. And I think another one that I've found really useful is the idea that, a lot of these big plants, they say, oh, I'm going to invest 350 million, I'm going to generate a tiny bit of electricity. And you go, well, what if we actually spent that 350 million on wind or solar? We'd get 10 or 15 times the amount of energy you're talking about getting out of your waste plant for, in a much less polluting way, and we can have it distributed, and we could have it, to be a much more resilient and successful technology. And so sometimes I think it's just getting 2 or 3 statements like that, which you can, okay, what are you looking for energy? Okay, then it'd be a much better to invest in this way. Are we looking for, we know that in New Zealand, our infrastructure commission has said to us, we've only got a very small amount of money. We've only got a small amount of people power. We have to be very careful about the projects we pick to invest in New Zealand, because, we've got to be effective with them. We've got to get the best bang for our money. And, it just makes no sense to spend a fortune in these huge incinerator projects. I think the other thing that people don't really understand, and often they'll shift their thinking, is when you explain that the people that the company is not going to give you the $350 million as a gift, that basically the community who lives in that area and the people who supply the waste to that facility for the next 20 years are going to pay through the nose every single ton that goes across the weighbridge as it goes into the facility. And people don't really like that idea. They want to think that, if they think, oh, well, who's going to pay who's going to pay them their return on investment? That really makes a big difference as well, I find, when you start talking about that. So I think sometimes it's pulling back a little bit from the intense technical side of it, and making a few points in that way I found that can be really helpful, and then that gives you a doorway to go into the technical information, but you can't really start with the real technical stuff because people just tune out. So we've got a few we've got one. Not quite sure if it's a question, Mark. I see that you're saying maybe you want, Mark, do you want to ask your question? Like just put your mic on and ask your question. I can't quite tell which the question is, and it seems like a lot of statements.
I'm not sure whether my microphone's working.
Yeah, it's going well. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
My interest in the subject is wide ranging, and I'm very grateful for the in-depth information. I run a operation we call the Plubber Project. So I was reiterating some of the aspects of what we're attempting to prove as alternatives to the burning of waste, where we encapsulate waste with other waste plastics and turn them into solid mass we call Plubber modules, as they contain plastics and rubbers and all sorts of mixed componentry that you might find in automotive and electrical industries, etc. And by turning them into what we call Plubber modules, they're aimed at reducing concrete use. So I just thought I'd mention that to all the very educated people on the panel who might like to look at this concept as an alternative to burning waste and the production of cement. I've also made a few notes there as to there's some very, very clever innovations in cement production and alternatives to concrete. Everything from fly ash, using electric and chemical systems to bond substrates. It's very comprehensive. One is very interesting where they use, out of Cambridge University in England, they have discovered they can use arc furnaces, and at the same time they're producing muck metals in arc furnaces. They're throwing crushed concrete in and turning it into an aggregate that's got a high cement content. It's proven
Okay.
And there's a number of others that are likely to reduce the impact of concrete production and thereby reduce the need to burn tires. So my project is about looking to a very low carbon, low risk, easy green tech alternative to repurposing these types of waste. So I'll leave it at that, and I've put my website's plubber.org.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark, for explaining that. I wonder, it seemed like there were two things there. There's one which is maybe using waste materials, kind of combining them and using them as building materials. And there was another idea which was, that idea of using ash and turning it into some sort of construction material. I know you've done a bit of work on that, Andrew, with the, the bottom ash. Can you say anything about that?
You're on mute, Andrew.
There you go.
Yeah, it's hard for me to comment without me seeing any more detail of this gentleman's project. So if you put the link in the chat, I'd be interested to read more about it.
It's at the bottom of my blurb there.
Okay. Yep, great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I think the last question we've got time for is one that Val's put in there. In terms of plastic to fuel, if the gas is being used to power the pyrolysis process, so say immediately used, is there any significant oil remaining? There's a guy in Auckland who's using that syn-diesel kind of process to power his crypto mining operations, and wondering what's going to happen with the oil if, given that we've got this fuel crisis. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's for me, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, the two things to say about that: you can't power the process with the gas alone. It's a false claim. And I refer again to the journal paper I wrote on called patented wonders. It's a common claim. It's impossible for the law because of the laws of thermodynamics. It's perpetual motion, which people have been anyway. I won't. Yes, it will reduce the amount of yield of product you will have to make an oil if you burn a lot more of the gas in short.
Okay, well, thanks so much, everybody. It's been really like the more questions you get, the more thoughts you have about what your questions might be. I always find so. I feel a bit bad turning us off at 8:59, but yeah, I know it's been a long day for most of us, so it's good to end on time. What we'll do is we'll have a look through the questions. Val's going to save them for us, and we'll if there's anything we haven't really answered, or I know that people still wondering about the situation with whether they should recommend landfilling timber or whether they should send it to the cement plant. There's still some issues there. Maybe we can try to figure out exactly what the consequences are of each choice. I know that it's really a bit of a false question in the long term going, should we landfill it or burn it? Really all the better answers are upstream. But we really, often we are faced with this false choice when we have our government is not so keen on actually implementing any of the measures we know would make a real difference. So, really want to encourage anyone who wants to, find out more information to check out the work of these three amazing people, to have a look on our website, Incinerator Free NZ. There's a lot of great information that Val stores there about all these different proposals. We want you to sign our petition if you're keen. We'd also get you to, a lot of the time we find out about these proposals around New Zealand because someone was biking past and they saw something weird going on, or they heard about something from a council meeting, or they heard that, there's an incinerator planned in their neighborhood, in a casual way. So if you hear about anything like that, just let us know or get in touch. If you want to do a presentation to your council or talk to your council about it, then get in touch with us and we can share what, information that we know. And one of the things I really want you to think about is, Shane Jones is pretty keen to get a special economic zone going at Marsden Point. Basically, it's a bit like the bad old days of the East India Company when they could roll around the world doing whatever they wanted and didn't have to really pay heed to what governments thought they should be up to or what the rules of the local community might have been. And it's another one of those ways in which our democracy is being eroded. And so, yeah, keep an ear out for that and try to learn a bit more about it. We really don't want to have parts of New Zealand where foreign companies can come and do what they like and not have to follow the rules that we've decided are important to us all. So going to close us all out with a karakia, and I chose this one because it really encourages us all to care for and appreciate everything in this world that brings us life. Me karakia tātou. Aio ki te rangi, aio ki te whenua, aio ki ngā me katoa, tihe mauri ora. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hope you get a good sleep or have a good day if you're on the other side of the world, and really appreciate you all making time to talk and listen and to think about this important issue. And really, we have to learn together and come to understand it as well as we can so that we can carry on doing our best to fight these proposals that make no sense and support the ones that do.